Hey guys. The last couple of years, we've had the good fortune of working in some projects that involve robot intelligence, robot personality. And I think today, we wanted to take the opportunity of sharing some of those insights, of course, abstracted and generalized so that as many people as possible can benefit from that. I think this is better probably, yeah. Let's take it away. So, 5.5 design principles to design better cobots. This scene, so this is like a kid story that I grew up with, and I think a lot of other German kids did so too. This is Luke, the steam engine conductor, and Jim, and they have a lot of adventures together with their steam locomotive. Her name is Emma, and she is a very fierce friend. She's actually one of the main characters in this story, and she, gets them through all sorts of trouble. But she's also just a machine, So there is actually this one very, very intense scene where they have to take her apart and build her back together. It's like heartbreaking for you as a kid. And you might think, okay, this is kind of a childish thing, like projecting personality onto an object. But there's a scientific word for that. It's like pareidolia or something. I guess it's cool. So it's a smart word, so it's a smart phenomenon, right? It's real. You don't have to worry about it. So. Yeah, nice faces. I think my favorite was there already. On the other hand of the spectrum, we have scenes like these, and I also do remember as a kid, seeing those first like factory robots that they probably had somewhere on the other side of the globe, building cars and welding and piecing stuff together. But you can actually see, everything is sort of fenced off. You have the guy standing there, and he's kind of safe, and the machines are safely locked away. And nowadays we have stuff like this. You might all have seen the videos. Yeah, pretty creepy. And the guy, like, there's no fence to contain this person, or like this guy. This is Atlas guy, or Boston Dynamics. So I think we can agree that the two are not quite the same, and that there is a certain tension here. And the tension is, between something that is imagined, kind of inferior. Emma's a person, but the other guys are still the boss. She's relatable, and on the other hand of the spectrum, we have something that is very real, probably more real than we all want to acknowledge, potentially superior and kind of scared. So there's a lot of, possible futures or a lot of facets on the spectrum that you could talk about, but today we want to talk about one that's, as we see, quite at the center there. There's one future where these two opposites will not be contradictions. There will be products out there that kind of manage to reconcile the very strongly diverging aspects. And one way to describe them is collaborative robots. Robots that we are going to work with, or cobots for short. And this is how Forbes magazine defines them. Cobots are the latest generation of robotic systems, and they are intended to work alongside humans. Now you might ask, why is this a design talk and not an engineering talk? I met one person earlier, Giovanni, and he asked me, so yeah, what kind of machine learning do you do? And I'm a designer. But the word systems isn't there. So as a designer, you care about holistic experiences, bringing something that works for everybody in a lot of different cases. It's about work, so you have sort of a goal-oriented, value-oriented process that has a defined form of success at the end. And you also have to consider humans because you work alongside them, so it's pretty user-centric, and I guess all of those kind of fit the bill of a typical design thinking project. And as designers, we like to ask how might we questions. So the question tonight is, and I'm going to answer that in part, how might we make the working relationship with cobots safe, productive, and rewarding? Now, that's the goal of tonight. So, step one was to get you all here, and now step two, and that's probably the harder one, is to kind of deliver on the promise. So, cobots. I think a lot of us know KUKA, German company, acquired by, what was it, Hisense a year ago? Ah, yeah, there you go. And they are probably, one of the companies on the vanguard when it comes to cobots. But if we want to, define larger principles, we have to cast our net a little wider because there's just not a lot of competitors out there. So We're going to look at a couple of more different fields that are adjacent to cobots as they are today defined. And one of them is drones, any sort of machine that's kind of autonomous and moves, which can be creepy. Or personal assistants like Jibo, now bankrupt, but very cute. Then of course, these virtual assistants like Alexa and many others, and you talk with them, right? If you're a kid, this might interest you more. It's a hybrid toy that has like physical and digital components merged. And of course, purely virtual characters. I mean, Mario is kind of a person, right? He's a plumber in New York. And some companion animals, which might be surprising, but we've been working with them for a long time, and they kind of fit the bill of that Forbes magazine description of what cobots are. And then if you mix if you mix all of those together, you end up with the 5 principles that I've been alluding to, and they are, as yet, represented by these beautiful illustrations done by Lisa. Lisa, where are you? New team member from France. So yeah, let's give an applause to Lisa. Okay, so let's take a look at those. And the first one is kind of an obvious one. Don't just look cute, be cute. So cuteness is kind of a topic. And as you can see, it's about kind of looking nice on the outside, but you don't know what's on the inside. So the most obvious one, I guess, is that you don't want to look threatening. So this was, I think, the very first generation of Google cars. When they built them, and I do remember people commenting on how stupid this looks. This cannot possibly be the future. It's silly and it looks needy and ugly. And I think that was a very smart move because it's a very intimidating thing to have a bulk of metal like that weighs 1 ton autonomously driving around the city. So if it looks as ugly and inferior as this, you might scatter some fears. And if you're designing a product and you don't know if people might think it's possible to perceive it as scary, then my recommendation is to just check, horror literature and see if there's a, like, for example, a book about a homicidal car. So if that's the case, you should definitely make your product kind of needy and inferior looking. Now, looks is not everything, right? So it's also about behavior. And this is a little product toy called Cosmo. And as you can see, it's very quirky. He's kind of trying to climb the blocks, but he can't, so he's kind of almost falling over. Yeah, isn't he cute, right? So, and I think it was pretty successful. They kind of promised that it had sort of educational purposes, which I'm not sure of. But it was a great success, even though it is this robot. And my guess is that when they made the second generation of it, called Vector, they kind of knew that we can communicate so much niceness through the behavior that we don't have to worry about making it like glossy black, which I think is probably the color would give you a sci-fi villain or something. So if your behavior is really good, you might not have to worry about the color as much, the coding. And then behavior is really important, and if you have a gentle sort of behavior, a certain type of moving, you automatically project a certain motivation to that. So this is Franca Enica, their product called Panda, kind of a KUKA competitor, and it's so gentle. It doesn't want to harm the balloon, and when the two people push it around, it's like, oh, it's so submissive. Isn't that gentle? So gentle motions do make a gentle character, even though this thing can, squeeze your skeleton. Hopefully. Then one more thing about not just looking cute but being cute is providing users with physical control. So this is a little product you can buy to add to your Alexa at home, and all it is a little bit of sticky tape that can cover your camera lens. And it doesn't seem like much, but this thing knows so much, it does so much. So if you have physical control over it, you still feel like you're in power. And I think, here we go again. Hello. I'll just have to speak up, I guess. Hello. Okay, let's see. Physical control over the cable. So this is something you can understand, you know, even if you're not a coder, even if you don't know what Amazon's, I don't know, product launching strategy is. You can just close the lid and you're the boss. And this is something that, you know, the makers of Barbie might have considered before they, you know, opened ways for Barbie to be handled and not really respect your privacy. So this is what has been dubbed surveillance Barbie. This is from 4 years ago. But it's still a problem today, so when Google Nest, no, let's see, I might just discard the microphone altogether. No, it works. So Google Nest turned out to just have built in a microphone into their products that nobody knew about. It was kind of an error, you know, so it just happened. So it looks very cute, it's round, but it doesn't act in a very cute way, and this sort of negative stuff rubs off. And this sort of, you know, negative stuff just rubs off onto the product because it's an insincere product. So the summary of this first section would be, don't just look cute, be cute, and make the robot feel gentle or weak to give users a sense of superiority. I think the examples we just looked at cover different facets of that idea. Second one, stick to your home turf. And you can see the mushroom is kind of part of the sensor thing, you know, so we're going to talk about that now. So this is Jibo, and I think I discussed it with Claude. I think they started the Kickstarter campaign 6 years ago, shipped like a year or so ago. And you know, when I saw this come out, I was like super excited. Okay, so this is a company that knows what they're doing. They're taking this to the next level. The founder was like a really smart lady from MIT that I had also like quoted in my master thesis, and I was like so happy. And he moves really nicely, he's so beautifully designed, and now they're out of business. You know, alongside with Curie, which I understand was partly funded by Bosch. So those are two examples that look really, really beautifully designed, and somehow they failed. I mean, they cost $900, you know, but why did they fail? One reason why I believe they failed was because they overpromised. You know, so when you look at the Jibo promotional videos, like it does this, it does that, like it tells you a story. You can use it like your Alexa, but it can also dance. Sweet. But you know, they maybe bit off more than they could chew. And actually, if you look at Gartner's cycle curve, or like hype cycle curve, smart robots are like, you know, we're not even at the peak of hypeness. You know, if you don't know that chart, I really like the simplicity of it. So this is what people expect from a technology. This is time. And at the beginning, it's like, oh my God, it's the new thing, like big data, like 7 years ago. And then, you know, the expectations skyrocket, and it's like, okay, so what is big data? Right now, augmented reality is in the shroud of disillusionment, and then only after a while you reach the peak. So the smart robots are very far away from that. So I think they overpromised. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, you have, you know, Kubo, which is a pillow with a motorized tail. It costs $40. You know, you can cuddle it, but it has like one use case that it fulfills, and it's quite successful. So this sells. You know, I'm gonna have a similar example. And then we spoke about Amazon Alexa before, and I think, you know, one thing that makes this really strong is not the design or whatever, but it's part of a hard functions offering service ecosystem. So Alexa is just, you know, this tall, but essentially it's kind of the tip of the iceberg of a huge ecosystem of what you can buy on Amazon. And I think, by the way, this is also why this guy is successful, by Neo, a thing called Nomi. It's based on your dashboard in the car. And you know, when you look at the promotional material, you might say, okay, this is just a gimmick, you know, it doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like Jibo. But again, you know, it's built by the same company that builds the car. So in that ecosystem, it's the unquestioned boss. So people will associate it with everything the car does. So I think this rubs off onto it positively. So, long story short, stick to your home turf is about making the robot part of the service ecosystem with clear functions to meet users' basic needs, and it can be as system as the pillow on your lap. Then, 3 out of 5. Show it's just a machine. You know, this might seem surprising because, you know, the way Jibo dances, for example, it's so lifelike, but it's obvious that it's just a machine. And this is probably a term many of you have come across before, the uncanny valley. If you Google for it, you get a more complex curve. This is sort of a simplified version. So this is how much people like it or how acceptable your cobot is, and this is how much it looks like a human being. So on this side of the spectrum, it would be a toaster, which is not creepy at all. On this side of the spectrum, there's me, which I hope I'm also not creepy. But if you combine a toaster and me, it's going to end up pretty creepy. And like when you Google for this online, I don't know what this is. It's pretty creepy, so I'm going to skip ahead. And by the way, I think 90% of all sci-fi movies that involve robots are kind of half in, half out. So they deliberately make it very open of, is this thing a human or isn't it? And it's very creepy, occasionally. So the example I just showed you was very obviously creepy, but I think even this one is a little creepy. It's a concept by Kuka, and it's obviously a machine, but the proportions are kind of, at least for me, I think still a little too close to an actual human being. So you have a head at the top with just one eye, you have a very strong body, and you don't know what's inside. So why not go for something like this? Again, when I saw this for the first time, I was just blown away. This is commissioned by Baidu, so Chinese Google, European company worked on it, and it's just so obviously a machine, but it's still so lifelike. And actually the tech is so low-tech, it's just an LED, or it's not even a screen. I have to say though, it's also not successful because probably it's the motors just aren't justified if this is Alexa. I mean, why should Alexa have a motor? And there's another good thing about keeping your technology transparent, which is nobody can claim that you're hiding a person on the inside. So I think it's a really funny headline. So there was this Russian, feat of engineering, but it was just an accurate design. And if you doubt that people will have emotional responses to your cobot, even if it looks like a pile of junk, think of Wall-E. It was designed to look like a pile of junk. And I think every sort of IoT project I've worked on had him on the mood board. It's just so good. I think it's really beautiful. And speaking about Wall-E, I think he says like 2 words, Wall-E and Eva, or is it just Eva? He has a very rudimentary language. So Alexa doesn't. Alexa has a very elaborate language, right? And we communicate with her very much like we do with other human beings, except we're not polite, And we don't say please and thanks if we order Alexa around. And this prompted, concerned parents to kind of look more into how their kid talks around Alexa and how their language becomes more and more like curt and blunt. And Amazon recognized this, so they added a politeness mode to Alexa. So if you worry about your child bossing other people around, you can only enable Alexa if your kid says please and thanks. But if you're worried about contaminating, human interaction because your robot talks to you in a weird way, there's also the other side of the spectrum. Again, I think animals are pretty much like cobots, alien, bodily superior, very useful, and many other things. But I'm sure this exists in a lot of different languages. But I know that in German, like if you have a woodworker like this guy, and he orders the horse around, he doesn't say left and right, he says used and hot, so that's a horse-ish for navigate. So in this case, we use sort of a rudimentary, dumbed down version of human language to kind of talk to the cobot, and that also will prevent you from contaminating your communication with the robot, and that having a negative effect on how you talk to people. So, show it's just a machine, keep the technology obvious so that it's easy for users to step in and out of the illusion. So when they know what they're getting, it's really hard to creep them out. Then, 4 out of 5, so nearly there. Stay in character. And again, this is about putting on a mask, staging something. So, this is also kind of a cuddly little thing, like Kubo, the pillow we looked at, only costs 100 times as much. No kidding. This is Paro, and it's a robotic seal that helps treat dementia patients. So if you think it's silly, you should watch the videos and see how people respond to this little seal being around. People love it. And The reason I'm mentioning it here and why it's important to stay in character is, of course, it runs out of battery. But you don't just charge it, you have this little, like, what's it called, a nozzle, like a pacifier, so you charge it by giving it this little, schnuller, and then it charges through that. So there is a metaphor for the edge case of the thing running out of battery, and the illusion is upheld. And if you don't do that, you get something like that. This is something we picked, or Manu, I think, picked up in Tokyo a couple of months ago. So Pepper is pretty successful there, but they didn't consider the off state. So obviously the metaphor breaks, or you enter the uncanny valley. Now, another thing that's really important is like reprogramming. So how do you reprogram something without breaking the metaphor? And this is Sawyer recently rebooted. I think they went out of business for a short while. But it's also one of those robotic arms. And I think it's true for all of the examples I showed. But if you want to reprogram that, all you're going to do is like show the arm where to perform a certain action. And you're kind of using the physical, natural interaction with it to program. Plus, you have to press a couple of buttons, that's for sure. But you're not being as blunt as they are in Westworld when the old guy reprograms one of his computers and says, what does it turn out your cheek, and then the entire face breaks, and obviously the boy is not a boy anymore. So there are elegant ways of reprogramming the cobot without destroying the metaphor. And then there will always be cases that you haven't conceived of, and people will always, gauge the illusion, how far can they bend it. And I think, Google Assistant is probably best at integrating humor into their offerings. So whenever they're kind of reaching the borders of the illusion of the assistant, it kind of has a funny way of responding. And one conversation I found was, or we found is, so I asked Google Assistant, want to be my friend? You can think of me as your assistant, keeping it professional. No, I want you to be my friend. That's okay, we can keep it business for now. Are you hitting on me? I would never hit on you. You're my friend. So that's really smart. And it's about the user trying to break the barrier of what the cooperation with the cobot is about, and Google Assistant having a very smart way of responding to that. And speaking of Google Assistant, let's also talk about Siri. Staying in character will also be a challenge if you scale across different media. Cobots will be able to do what we can do, leave their body behind and migrate to another device. And I think I'm really looking forward to seeing Siri, as a sapient haze, in virtual reality. And already today she lives on your phone, she lives in the HomePod. It's just lighting, it's just a bunch of lines, but they will work very, very beautifully in those different media. And if you want to stay in character long term, that's probably something you should consider too. So staying in character is about finding metaphors for all sorts of situations so that users can have a coherent mental image of the code, even if you program it, etc. And the last one, and then we have another half one, is fostering emotional bonds. So I think this is kind of what everybody wants to do. And I'm going to show you one example that does that, even though it doesn't look like that. So this is a RoboKind, a therapeutic robot. I think this example is from Australia, and this is pretty creepy, right? But it's really successful at training people with autism to pick up nonverbal cues in interhuman interaction. And the reason why it does it so well is that it's very, very patient, so it stays positive, regardless of how many times you repeat, what a smile is. Other kind of gestures. So it's very successful, and it's very important for this thing to stay positive because, again, there is a sci-fi dystopian version of this. This guy certainly did not stay positive. And then this is Curie, again, one of the robots that went out of business recently. What I really like about it is that the eyes are really they're mechanical, and there's a white circle underneath the eye slit. And when that slides up, it looks a little like he smiles, and then there's also the opposite, and then he frowns. So it's very beautiful, very beautifully done. It's clearly a machine, but it has a certain limitation in terms of the emotions it can display. So what they added is this little heart glow that Curie displays when he's particularly aroused emotionally. And it adds another layer of emotional intensity. I wonder where they have the idea from. So again, there's a sci-fi equivalent for this. And I think it's really important about also appreciating the kinds of bonds that people might have with your robot. So it seems like there is no upper end to the spectrum. So this is Aibo, like the first Sony robotic dog from I think 1999 or something. And Sony stopped supporting it a couple of years ago. They launched a new version, so the dogs die, And people have had them for years and years, and they grieve when they die. So this guy is a monk at a Japanese temple, I think, and it's now part of his job to perform the honors for dead robotic dogs. And they kind of have a robotic dog cemetery. So there's funerals, there's also weddings. This is a game also from Japan called Love Plus. And I spotted, like within the last month, I spotted 2 instances of people marrying one of the characters in the game. So you can pick like 1 out of 3 girlfriends, and then you can play being in a relationship. And for some people, this is so important that they want to marry that virtual person. And if you think that this is a Far Eastern phenomenon, then you might want to read reviews about Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a video game. And it really doubles down on their horses. So you're a cowboy in the Wild West, and your horse is one of your main tools, but it's also a companion, and you can pat it and kind of make it less nervous in danger. And the more like you care for it, the better it performs. Which, by the way, like I interviewed one of the heads of the Munich rescue dog team very briefly, and he said it's the exact same thing with actual dogs. So the better you care for them, the better they perform. So. And I want to read a quote from you because sad story, but true. The horse gets killed 3 hours into the story. So for dramatic purposes, no matter what you do, your first horse gets killed. And one of the gamers who played this, his name is Blaine. He posted this on keengamer.com. He says, "I spent 3 or 4 hours bonding with my horse and increasing its stats, only for its life to be taken away prematurely by some bounty hunters. I was devastated when he was brutally killed by some ruthless bounty hunters. I never anticipated that a game would make me feel this way about a death, any death, not just a horse's death, any death. Like, you also kill people in games. It was really strange to feel anything at all for a virtual horse. I don't know where he's from, but it sounds like he's a native speaker, so it's not a Far Eastern phenomenon only. So this is about letting users develop a long-term relationship with cobots so they are more satisfied. So those are the 5 principles. I think we've looked at all of them. Let's discuss them later. And there is also another half principle, that I would like to close the talk with, and that is called seek far-fetched inspiration. So this is an evolving domain. And I remember one of my professors in my master's course, Carmen Planinovic in Zurich, and she said, so whenever you design something like this, like I entered robotics back then, always make one concept that's like a jellyfish, then make one that's like a dog, and then make one that's like a butler. And I was like, what on earth, But the jellyfish will make you think about some sort of alien body language with lighting. The dog is about the typical cobot as I see it, like something that you can relate to, that is kind of related to us. And then the butler is, of course, the human. So, I don't know, let's just think a little bit more about jellyfish next time we go to work. So, thank you very much.